Well, all right, kiddos, it's time to sharpen up those edges and grease up your chains. We are going to live it up with mountain life. Dropping in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yo Galakasla Delkola Nugwa Amnalaga, Gayuklin la Kwakwaka'wakw Git Ligwithdow, Kautkuna Hinu Dikyan.
That was Nalaga, Avis O'Brien, speaking in the traditional language of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation. Avis is an indigenous weaver, teacher, dancer, singer, and a land-based cultural empowerment facilitator who comes from a family of notable snowboarders and is our guest today here on Live It Up with Mountain Life. My name is Feet Banks, and if you want to know what Avis said there, stick around. We have a really awesome and I think pretty impactful conversation together. But first, how are you, mountain lifers? Are you holding your own? Are you thriving? Surviving? Are your edges sharp? How's your base looking? Do you need a wax? Heck, we probably all need a wax, don't we? What's happening lately around here is it's freezing cold out west. The Arctic outflow winds are hammering in from the north, blowing chairs off my deck, knocking over recycling bins, and worst of all, stripping all that precious pow off the north faces of the southern coast mountains here and pushing it back out to sea, which is where it came from in the first place. It's minus 41 with the wind chill at the top of my local ski hill, and all the fresh wax in the world's not going to help that, is it? That being said, I do love dramatic weather, and the sun is bright, and the snow is white, and the sky is bluebird, and when it's this cold out there, the mountains just look better, don't they? Everything has that little bit of extra pop. Let's think about that while we hear a few words from me, speaking on behalf of our friends over at Jack Wolfskin, makers of sustainable outdoor clothing, gear, and footwear. Hey, mountain lifers. Do you know about Jack Wolfskin? For almost 40 years, the Jack Wolfskin name and paw print has been a symbol of their trailblazing spirit and regard for nature. Inspired by an expedition in northern Canada in 1981, they have led the pack with innovative eco-conscious technologies, a commitment to social responsibility, and forward-thinking outdoor apparel and equipment designs. If you haven't seen the Jack Wolfskin paw print before, it's because they've only just completed their newest den here in North America. Jack Wolfskin will see you in the wild, wherever that is for you. Today's guest is Avis O'Brien. She is of Haida, Kwakwaka'wakw, and Irish heritage, and one of her indigenous names, Nalaga, translates to woman of light or bringer of light. And that is exactly what she does through her work, which includes introducing indigenous people to their traditional arts, land, and culture through workshops that focus on topics like suicide prevention, addiction, and helping heal some of the intergenerational trauma that comes with centuries of genocide and colonization. Avis is a snowboarder. Both her sisters have had professional careers, and she's also a mother, a roller skater, a survivor of addiction, and a total badass who says that just the fact that she is alive is an act of resistance. I was able to reach Avis at her home via the technological wonders of Zoom, and because of that, the sound quality here is not 1000% as crisp as I'd like it, but it is what it is, isn't it, mountain lifers? So let's start off with Avis's translation of what she said off the top of the show.
My English name is Avis O'Brien, and my Kwakwaka'wakw name is Nalaga, which translates to bringer of daylight. And my Haida name is Kautkuna, which means sitting great. And I come from the Kawas Eagle clan in Haida Gwaii and the Giggle Gum Napmima of the Ligwithdow, which is one of the 17 tribes of the Kwakwaka'wakw.
I kind of want to start off in the mountains. I saw a post that was your dad's 70th birthday not that long ago, and you guys went shredding on the ski hill together?
No, I wasn't there, unfortunately, but I just seen I seen the video. He's got some young fella who likes to make videos of his snowboarding. So
yeah,
I just show.
He's an animal, that guy. Like, at his age, he rides way harder than me, way harder than people half his age.
Yeah, I know, he's crazy.
Is that something you grew up doing? I mean, obviously, both your sisters moved into snowboarding. Were you guys up on the island ski hills a lot as a family?
Yeah. So as soon as we could walk, my dad had us on skis, threw us on skis, and I actually don't know how he did it with 3 kids. My mom never came on those trips. It was just him and 3 kids, and I have no idea how he survived. Obviously, his love for the mountains and his desire to share that with his kids was behind that. But as a parent now, it's like I can barely do it with one.
Yeah, totally, totally. This it would be the Vancouver Island ski hills. Then
Y-
you
Yeah,
grew
so
up in Alert Bay,
yeah, we grew up in Numgeese territory, the unceded territory of the Numgeese First Nation, also known as Alert Bay. And so it's a ferry ride in about an hour drive.
wow.
So we would get up very early in the morning and every weekend, Saturday, Sunday. That's what we did in the wintertime, Mount Cain.
Awesome. And that was a small community where you grew up then. What was it like? They know a ferry off of an island, off of a mainland. It's pretty remote.
It's very remote, yeah. Growing up in Alert Bay was, there's a complex history there when we start talking about the history of colonization and residential schools. And Alert Bay the Numgeese Nation is a very powerful nation in the sense that during the potlatch ban, they went underground with their potlatching and ceremony. So it's very powerful in that sense, and
Like
just
they
a
would
beautiful.
they would still have them just because they were so remote. They were able to kind of slide under the radar, or
I guess so. Yeah.
awesome.
Where not, yeah. So the culture is very strong there. And I also think Alert Bay is really cool in the sense that it's still pretty divided in the sense of you've got the reserve and then the non-Indigenous community, but the connections and the relationships between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous community is really a beautiful thing to witness, I think, there.
Yeah, like for you, you would be, as a kid, did were there two schools? I know in Pemberton there was the Mount Curry School, the Lilwat School, and then we also had the Pemberton School, which caught Whistler kids and farmers from the meadows. And was it that way there too, or was there just the one school for you as kids?
There was one school on the reserve,
Right,
Tlisalagala, I think is how you say it. That there's the T school, and then this the other school, Alert Bay Elementary,
right, right.
and yeah,
And the kids all got along?
yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, kids will be kids. There's always bullies, but
Of course, of course. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when I was younger, it was, post Oka, there was Stein Valley protests. There was a lot of sort of stuff happening between the colonial industry and the traditional indigenous, lands and rights, and logging versus, and yeah, spotted owls. And there was a lot going on. But in the school, the children, would almost make jokes about it. It was a small school, 300 kids.
yeah.
And it was never there was the aggression of the adult world never bled over into the kids. And
Mm,
now those kids are, I mean, I'm middle aged now, but children from that era have grown into decision making roles, and hopefully, that sort of peace and harmony is carrying over. Did you stay for your whole childhood life in that area, or did you guys move?
no, we moved. I was in grade two. Me and my sisters are all 3 years apart, and
Right.
so I was in grade two, and I'm the middle child. And we moved to Comox territory here on Vancouver Island in Courtney.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then we started snowboarding on Mount Washington when we moved here.
Which I'm sure was a bit of a step up in one way, but also a step down from Mount Cain in others, as far as vibe.
Yeah.
What were you into in those days? I mean, I've read Spencer's movie Precious Leader Woman. She talks about kind of rediscovering her indigenous roots later in life. Was it similar to you, where that side of your history and who you are was a little bit subdued growing up?
Totally. Our family was like the indigenous side of my family anyways, was successfully colonized and assimilated in the sense that we didn't grow up with a positive connection to our indigenous identity, a connection to land, culture, ceremony in any way. So that was the goal of colonization, and all of those assimilation policies was to strip indigenous people of those things, because those are the things that make us strong as a people. Um, and if you look at the current plight of indigenous people, it's directly related and rooted in all of those federal government policies. So definitely, I remember dancing at the Talisalagila school when I was a little girl. Like that's where I learned to in like indigenous Kwakwaka'wakw style dancing. That's sort of the only memory I have of being involved in culture.
Right.
Um, and it was no fault of anybody's, everybody was trying to protect their children, right? Because if you got punished for speaking your language and, abused for, and shamed for being indigenous, then it was a protective mechanism to not pass that on to your children.
Right.
So it's not of any fault or of my parents in any way, because they're just doing what they can to protect us. And that was a
Yeah.
protective mechanism. So I didn't find my identity until way later in life.
Right. I mean, now we'll skip ahead a little bit, I guess, but you came into the artistic side first of it. Is that what happened, or?
Yeah, so I guess more, I think social justice actually is what sort of drew me to it. So I did watch my sister Megan weave for a little bit. I struggled with addiction in my life, which is a very normal human response to carrying the burdens of genocide.
Yeah.
And so while my sisters were competitively snowboarding, they were off every weekend with my dad. I was using substances, trying to just survive in the best way that I could with coping with the impacts of trauma.
Yeah, I think a
So
lot of
what
people maybe don't understand that the generational trauma, that can weigh on a person without anyone really even realizing it, especially more in those days before the conversation started becoming a bit more front line.
Mhm. Yeah, when you hear, the leader of our country, Justin Trudeau, talk about it's a dark chapter in our history. It's not a dark chapter. That's why when I use the language, this genocide, it's attempted and ongoing. It's not something that happened 200 years ago and
Mm-hmm.
now it's over. It's very much alive and present. Our children are being sexually abused at rates that are, rooted in residential schools. It's just as bad as it was then. Missing and murdered Indigenous women's epidemic. The leading cause of death of Indigenous people is suicide. These are all very deficit-based statistics, but this is the reality of what we're living in.
Yeah.
So when the leader of our country talks about this as a dark chapter in our history, I think that's really problematic because it gives our society the sense that this bad thing happened and now it's over. And we're really still living with because of that intergenerational trauma piece. Because what I experienced in my life, I also carry what my ancestors experienced, and that trauma and that shame and that removing of our identity, language, and culture really lives inside of me as well.
It feels like there's been a bit more recognition of, what nowadays, or to me feels like it's a fairly obvious correlation of when outlaw a culture and kidnap people's children, and then those children, come home and grow up with heavy trauma. Of course, it's going to be more difficult for them to just bounce right back into being perfect parents, perfect community, perfect people. It's not going to happen.
Yeah,
And then you have another generation being raised under that. And I feel like, talking about this dark chapter from years and years ago, which it's not years and years ago. There was kids in residential schools when I was in high school.
In 1996 was the last one that closed.
So I do feel like people are starting to realize that correlation more, but it's definitely a new realization for settlers, anyhow, for a lot of people.
Totally. Yeah.
You got to see, I mean, pretty firsthand, I guess it sounds like, you lived with addiction. You were that, the old saying is, if you want to see the effects of generational trauma because of the residential schools, you just need to go to the downtown east side of Vancouver, and that's where you'll get your examples of what happens. Did you spend some time down there, or were you living, like, I know you moved to Calgary at one point, but
yeah. So I did end up. So I was in the downtown east side as a youth. I was 19 or 20 years old. And so my addiction had progressed. So addiction is, like I said, it's a normal response to carrying the burdens of genocide. It's a normal response to trauma. What trauma does, and maybe I'll just share a little bit. So what trauma does is it really overwhelms our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system. And I won't get into sort of the neuroscience around it, but as a result of that overwhelm, we live with a dysregulated nervous system. So we're sort of oscillating between like a fight flight response and a dissociation. And those two nervous system states don't feel good. That's where depression lives, anxiety, worry, panic, feeling cut off from our bodies. So those are the symptoms that lead people to want to use substances to regulate their nervous system. Folks who don't struggle with trauma or don't struggle with addiction can use staying incredibly busy, using food, exercising, over exercising. So there's other ways that people develop unhealthy coping mechanisms that aren't necessarily addiction. But for myself, addiction was the main way that I used to cope with my trauma. And so as my addiction progressed, I started using substances when I was 12 years old. And as my addiction progressed, that's where my addiction ended, was in the downtown east side. And yeah, I mean, you go down there and it's like 70% indigenous people. My great grandfather and my great grandmother, they lived the last 30 years. My great grandfather was a hereditary chief of the Ligwith-Dao, and my grandmother was a matriarch in Haida Gwaii. And they both ended up living the last 30 years of their life in an SRO, in a single room occupancy hotel in the downtown east side. And that, that's not what they wanted for themselves. They're both residential school survivors, but that's the reality of what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Our people had been so deeply marginalized and abused and impacted, pushed to the fringes of society. That's where you end up.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, you're here now, and you're dedicating your life's mission is to shining light, on these issues, on these people. How did you yourself get out of, that loop of trauma and addiction?
So there was something that happened to me. There had come sort of a time where I didn't want to be using substances anymore. I was addicted to heroin. I was an IV heroin user. And there came a point where I didn't want to be doing that anymore. I wanted out, but when you're physically addicted to something, you can't just stop.
Yeah.
And so something happened to me. I was in an alley and I was coming down from heroin. I was very sick. And I can't really explain it at the time. It was sort of like an outside spiritual force that just sort of entered my being and allowed me the energy. And to get up out of that alley. And I had the thought that this can't be what my life is, what I'm here on this planet to do. There has to be more for me. And then I hitchhiked to my mom's house in Courtenay, and I got on the methadone maintenance program. And methadone, which, in the scientific world called opioid antagonist therapy, basically allows you to not be sick. It's prescribed heroin, prescribed opiates that allows you to not be physically ill without heroin. Because I was in a loop where I didn't want to be using anymore, but I couldn't.
Yeah, your body
get very
needs
sick.
it.
And I had gotten off of heroin cold turkey prior, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I knew that I wasn't capable of doing that again. So methadone allowed me to break that cycle, and it allowed me to get into treatment.
Yeah. And I guess like you start by beating the physical craving, and then you start to work on the root cause.
Totally. Yeah.
It's interesting how one day is different than the day before, and all of a sudden you found that direction to do it. Do you think about that a lot?
I think, oh man, a lot. Yeah. And I imagine that was just my bottom. Everybody needs to find their own bottom. And for me, that was mine.
Yeah.
That was the lowest I ever wanted to go. And I didn't want to ever go back there. And I actually did end up going back there. So I got into treatment. I was clean for 4 months, living in a treatment center, a recovery house, and I relapsed, and I ended up exactly where I ended up. And that time when I sort of came to in an SRO in the downtown east side, using heroin again, said that I don't ever want to feel like this ever again. I don't ever want to be in this situation again. And that was it. That was the end of it. And that was 16 years ago.
Wow. And
so it's just this.
So how old were you then? I mean, how long did that addiction hold on to you?
Well, from the age of 12 to 21.
Right.
Yeah, I just started with alcohol as a 12-year-old, which is insane. 12 years old is just a kid. But
And as a parent now, you look back and you look at what you were like at 12, and
my poor parents.
Crazy.
I really hope to God I don't have that same problem with my child.
Yeah. So now you've made this decision, you've come back again, and what was the path from, you know, that internal decision to where you are now, which is, you know, this helping others and you know, a healer rooted in your indigenous culture and in the ancient indigenous practices, and how did you get from that point to where you are now?
Oh, it's been such a journey. I think the first couple years of my recovery was really just focused on trying to navigate life without using substances. How am I going to just like the day to day figure out how to live with my emotions without needing something, some substance? And I replaced my addiction with food. I think I gained 70 pounds in my recovery because yeah, you lose out or you stop using one coping mechanism and then you pick
Yeah.
up another one.
I mean,
And
what was there one food you just couldn't say no to? I mean, right now, you know, instead of drinking, I eat a shitload of Star Kiss gummies or whatever they're called. But was there
yeah.
one thing for you where it was just like, give me more?
Oh yeah, it's just anything like lots of
Right,
flour, lots of bread and sugar and yeah, all those
right,
good
right,
feeling things.
right.
Yeah. Um, so the first couple of years was, and I started working, I was a cashier at London Drugs, and that was very affirming for me. It was my first sort of job that I was able to keep for any length of time. It provided me with agency and confidence. And then I started attending post-secondary school in Indigenous studies courses. And I think it was really a social justice uh, inspiration that sort of awoke this fire in me.
Right.
It became awoken in school when I started learning about Indigenous history. I never knew. I had
Yeah.
absolutely no idea when I was using and drinking. And, you know, the residential school in Alert Bay, it's been torn down now, but I didn't know that was a residential school. I used to go there all the time. That's where my mom bought her smokes. It was the
Yeah.
band office.
No, totally. I, as a young person, similar, you know, we drove by the residential school on the way to my mom's work at the mill, the Lejac residential school in between Fort Fraser and Fraser Lake. And no one ever talked about what it actually was at all. Right.
Totally.
Was for you was how did you end up in that Indigenous studies program? Was that something that came from your experience, or was it just sort of a, oh, maybe this, and then it grew from there?
Yeah, yeah, I knew that I wanted to start. So I went to Langara College and I started looking around and I'm not sure what it was, but it sparked my interest. Like,
Right.
oh, I'm Indigenous. Maybe I want to learn about these things. And through those courses, I met these powerful Indigenous women who were really leading the way in the world and doing such important work. And it was the narrative had changed for me when I met those women. Prior, when I thought about being Indigenous, I thought about all the negative stereotypes that exist in our society. And I won't name them because we all know what they are, but that's what I thought about when I thought about being Indigenous. And so meeting those women, it exposed me to a different narrative and it allowed me to want to learn more about my culture. And then my sister Megan had been weaving. She had brought weaving back into our family. And because that narrative had changed, I became open to learning from my sister. Where
Right.
previously I watched her, but I still had all of that shame buried deep within me, and I still didn't understand my culture. I didn't understand what she was doing, and so I sort of watched her from a distance.
Yeah.
Um,
I wonder if there's a parallel there with your younger sister who, you know, I don't think struggled with addiction, but, you know, was on this path of Olympic athlete, which is a very similar, busy, singular, driven forward kind of thing. And
yeah.
then, you know, we see in the film Precious Leader Woman where she comes, you know, to these same sort of realizations later in life. But Megan really
Mm-hmm.
sort of paved the way a little bit, it feels like.
Oh, 100% she did. She brought weaving back into our family like, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, maybe even longer, 17 years. And she really brought that to light. And she was the one in our family to really do that work too. She was the first one of our family to go to Haida Gwaii to meet our Haida relatives. Yeah, she really paved the way.
I wonder about, I mean, it's the connection to the land, you know, to your own you know, ancestral territory, but also just to the land in general. You know, your family grew up, you know, on the water, snowboarding, you know, connected to the land in one sense. But how did you, or can you describe a little bit when the connection to the land sort of clicked in from a more indigenous perspective for you?
Well, I think the land has been, when I learned how to weave from my sister for the first time, she brought cedar bark into my life and the power, the medicine of cedar. And the cedar is a medicine that absorbs our energy. So what we're thinking, what we're feeling, all becomes imbued into the medicine. And I think working with cedar was really the first, what brought to life it within my body, that connection to land. And it started to diminish, or it started to take away that shame that had been bred into me through residential schools and passed on to me through my ancestors. And to weave with cedar and to work with cedar, you have to know how to harvest it, and harvesting requires being out on the land. And that experience of being out on the land, working with that medicine, my spirit was so happy. I'm not depressed, I'm not anxious, I'm not traumatized. I'm just like this happy, normal person when I'm on the land.
Right. And I mean, I read you lead cedar hat weaving workshops with elders now, and that's part of your I don't want to say it routine, but part of your prescription for people to heal is to, it's as simple as playing with some cedar bark in your hands.
Sounds simple, but it's so complex.
Or it's the first step.
Totally. And I've been studying a lot of the neuroscience of what happens when we're engaged in indigenous contemplative practices or when we're out on the land. And it's quite fascinating. It's like neuroscience and Western science is now just catching up with what indigenous people have known since time immemorial. And we're creating neuroscience to show what happens when we're engaged in on the land practices. And that, again, just going back to, that's why they made those things illegal, so that in order for our lands to be taken over, break our spirit so that, and how they did that.
It almost feels like it didn't seem like they were that intellectually advanced to understand neuroscience back then, but somehow they knew that if we break these connections, whether they understood the fact about, the nervous system and neurons and whatever they call it, plastification of the brain, or I know that's not the right word.
Neuroplasticity.
Yeah, neuroplasticity. I want to touch on that while we're here. The idea of neurodecolonization, and it's, from what I understand, comes from Dr. Michael Yellowbird out of the University of Manitoba. But when you first came upon those studies and his work, was that another one of those sort of light bulb moments for you?
Absolutely. So when I found Dr. Michael Yellowbird's work, he calls it neurodecolonization. And his life's work has been to study what happens in our brains and in our bodies when we're engaged in indigenous contemplative practices. And when I found his work, it made my life experience make sense. Because when I first got sober, basically all there is for people who are struggling with addiction is 12-step programs.
Yeah.
That's it. If you struggle with alcoholism, go to AA. And it's great because it provides people who are drowning with a life raft, right? You get a network, you get a community, you get a place to go and share. But it is so problematic because what it does is it pathologizes people. So it tells you if you struggle with addiction or alcoholism that you have a disease. It locates the problem within the person. And I don't think that's what's broken is our society. That's what's broken. We're not broken. We're responding in a very normal way to something very bad that's happened. So I veered away after about 5 years of being in Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. I veered away from that and I turned to land-based healing. I started going to sweat lodges, Yuipi ceremonies, Sundance ceremonies, pipe ceremonies, working with cedar, praying, cold water cleansing. And that's where I found relief. And I didn't know physiologically what was happening when I was engaging in those practices. I just knew that it was providing the kind of relief that I needed and it was making me stay on my path. And then when I found Dr. Michael Yellowbird's work, I said, wow, that's why it was helping me. That's why it felt so good. So he'll show like a brain on ceremony and a brain not on ceremony. And it shows the different parts of the brain that become activated. It shows that serotonin is released, dopamine is released, which is incredibly important for trauma survivors. Yeah. As we know that we're constantly flooded with adrenaline and cortisol.
How important is it, I feel like the fact that this neuroscience has been proven out in the Western medicine world, where somebody that survives a helicopter crash will go into this eye movement, tracking a light with their eyes, and do the same thing in your brain, which is happening when somebody goes to a dance ceremony or a sweat lodge. How important do you think it is that this science that Dr. Yellowbird, is serving up has been proven out in the Western side, and does that make it much more accepting? Does that make the colonizers much more accepting of it?
Totally. Yeah, they always want the science.
Yeah.
We want proof. We want proof. Yeah, and I mean, I was never. I mean, I dropped out of university. I was not an academic person, but I'm a nerd for neuroscience and trauma theory now,
right?
Because it helps me to understand my experience and the experience of my people.
Yeah.
And it gives us a direction for how to heal from trauma. And I'll just share this very quickly. So our autonomic nervous system can be, there's 3 states that our nervous system can be in. And our nervous system is an upside down triangle at the base of the brainstem. So at the bottom is dissociation, in the middle is fight flight, and at the top is ventral vagal. And that's when we feel safe. You and I are probably there right now. We feel safe, we feel regulated, we're able to make eye contact, engaging in relationships. The trouble is those bottom 2 states, sympathetic activation and dorsal vagal, the dissociation and fight flight, when you're traumatized, you're sort of oscillating between those 2 states. The beautiful thing is our culture, indigenous contemplative practices, and all of those things I just mentioned, cold water cleansing, sweat lodge, ceremony, all of those things have the ability to move us into the top of the triangle where we feel safe and regulated, and we're able to engage in the kinds of relationships where healing occurs.
Yeah. This is really interesting to me, from the mountain life side of things. It's a lot of, let's go out and ride that line and look over the edge of risk and get into that flow state where, everything else drops away except for what's right in front of your face. And there's less conversation about how, that's an addictive thing as well. And just because you're outside and in good shape doesn't mean you can't become addicted to something, right?
Oh, totally.
And we see it in our culture with, you can ski or snowboard at this high level, and then you go into that, substance abuse in the evenings, and you get a circle of that. And it hasn't really been talked about that much, but it is all related, I think, to what you're talking about here.
Well, then it goes back to that dysregulated nervous system, right? If you have a dysregulated nervous system and you want to feel better, using, being in the mountains addictively and, over exercising is totally one of the ways that people do that. Yeah. I see a runner, he's running by my house, snow, rain, whatever. It's like every day he's so dedicated, and he's in great shape, but
dedicated or crazy, maybe.
People's inability to sit and be with themselves, because that's when all those feelings start to come up. So we can, and now I do it with work. I totally disassociate through work. I work compulsively because I am uncomfortable with those feelings. So trauma healing is it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey.
When did you start the practice of, using the lessons you've learned and setting up, seminars and stuff to help? And I don't want to screw up the name because I know this is one of your indigenous names, but is it Nalaga or how do I pronounce that?
Nalaga.
Nalaga. So Nalaga counseling. When did that start?
Nalaga consulting, it started in about a decade ago, I guess. It started as Nalaga Designs. I just started making cedar woven jewelry and selling it. And then it's just evolved over time. I think my work feels very supported by the creator, where I don't have a degree in counseling. I don't have any Western education. I just have my lived experience. And then I've also been in therapy for 17 years. So I have a lot of experience with therapy.
Yeah.
And so it's just sort of my work feels very supported by the creator, where I don't seek out opportunities. Opportunities come to me, I say yes to them. And then like Precious Leader Woman, I got asked to be the cultural consultant. I was not a cultural consultant at that time. I didn't even know what that was. Opportunity came, I said yes. And then that's when my business changed into Nalaga Consulting.
Right.
So it's just basically I take my lived experience, what has helped me to understand my own experience, how to heal from trauma, how to heal from addiction, take all of that and develop it into programs and deliver it to community.
Yeah, and I it looks like you do a lot with, Indigenous youth, Indigenous elders. Do you do much work with settlers as well, or?
I do a bit. So I did one workshop for Google actually reached out to me and wanted to be part of reconciliation, which I don't really like that word anymore. But I did offer a workshop to Google staff around reconciliation. So my focus when I work with non-Indigenous folks is really to build allyship and to dismantle some of those negative stereotypes,
Right.
to highlight the beauty of Indigenous culture.
And the word reconciliation, what is it you don't like about that? Does it just sound like a marketing term thrown on, or without enough follow through, or?
Yeah, exactly. So like when we talk about reconciliation and we've got women's bodies being dumped into landfills and we're not going to go find them, that's not reconciliation. We're not doing anything. We're not giving people their land back.
Yeah.
It's like, my idea of reconciliation would be to have more healing centers than there are damn churches. Why are there so many churches?
Yeah.
Religion has like destroyed our culture and communities, but there's still churches everywhere. And it just seems like a buzzword that's like, it's just sort of a front, and nothing's really changing. Leading cause of death is still suicide. Missing and murdered Indigenous women it's still rates of genocide. Like nothing's changing with reconciliation.
Still communities that don't have clean drinking water.
Exactly.
Right? Which, guaranteed they had clean drinking water back in the day.
Totally.
So,
yeah. So it just seems like the government they want to be part, say that they're part of something, but I don't really see any positive changes actually happening.
Right. I think from my perspective, 40 middle-aged white man, so definitely potentially part of the problem, not the solution. But from my perspective, it seems like the good news is as maybe it always is grassroots. It's things like the Indigenous Life Sport Academy, Indigenous Women Outdoors. This is just my end of the world. I hope there's a lot of similar things going on across the country as well. But in my sort of sphere of knowledge, these are, started by younger people, usually Indigenous people. We do have things like the cultural centers. There's a beautiful one up in the Nass Valley. The one in Whistler seems to be, doing a lot of great stuff. But there does seem to be a groundswell of young movements, usually Indigenous led, and then younger children that are on their own reaching out to grasp the old ways. I took my son, we helped build a traditional Ishkin pit house with a 17-year-old kid from the Mount Curry community. And that's what they did the whole summer. Him and his buddies were just, cutting down logs, building this pit house. And, nobody told them to do that. That's just what he wanted to do. So does it feel the same for you, where there is a groundswell of good news? It's just not led by the people that could really make a difference.
Totally. Yeah.
Resources.
There is so much incredible work. There is so much Indigenous joy and wisdom and brilliance and laughter and incredible healing and wellness in our communities. But exactly like you said, it's built from our people up. It's not coming from the government in any way, shape, or form, is what I see.
What do you think is the biggest hurdle for that path forward then? Is it the same hurdle that it's always been, like the powers that be?
I think so.
Right.
I don't think that the government wants to give our land back. That's for sure. I think that would be step one. We
just had a film here in Whistler, and some members of the Honeygatane Nation came down, and that's on the Chilcotin Plateau. They actually have, they run their own land up there. I believe it's the only community in the country that is, the autonomous leaders of their own land.
Yeah.
I have to look into it more. I think it might have something to do with the Chilcotin War, and they won a war, so they get to keep their land, or some, ridiculous idea. But at least there's one example.
Yeah.
When it comes to the land, I obviously for me, I've grown up in the mountains, in the forest, on the rivers. Our magazine, our listeners, a lot of those are people that love the land and respect the land. And the idea is the more people that go onto the land, the more reason they'll have to want to protect it. But
Mhm.
do you ever, is there any sort of clash there where some settlers will be like, well, if we give the land back, we won't be able to use it, and how does that play a role in what you think the way of the future should be?
Well, I don't think in terms of snow sports, I don't
Yeah,
think
or
giving
biking
give
or whatever. It's not that people need to understand.
yeah, no, I don't, not from my perspective. I think everybody has a different perspective on it, but I don't think so. I know that we're meant to come together and to know that we're all related. Namwayut is we are all one and we are all related, and there's no sort of going back from that, but finding a way forward
Yeah. Yeah. And
together.
I feel like, the mountain bike trail through some indigenous land that's respectfully used is not something that needs to be worried about compared to, the mine that's going to poison
Yeah.
the watershed, right?
Oh,
Or
yeah. Yeah.
the deforestation that is going to, ruin the ecosystem, the land, the animals, everything.
Yeah. One of the things though I think is around the privilege that comes along with having a mountain bike,
Yeah.
having a snowboard, because I've joined the Vancouver Island First Nations snowboard team with my daughter,
Yeah.
and I'm so incredibly grateful for that opportunity because that program provides opportunity for Indigenous kids on Vancouver Island to be in the mountains. I don't ever see any people of color or any Indigenous people on the mountain. Never.
Yeah.
It's all white folks, and that's great, but like, and why? But why is that? It's
Yeah.
because it's a very privileged sport. You have to have money. You have to have an able body. A lot of our people don't have access to that kind of sport. So I think what Indigenous Life Sport Academy, the Vancouver Island First Nation snowboard team, these organizations are doing such important work because they're providing access that Indigenous people don't usually have access to.
Yeah.
So it's the privilege of having a mountain bike. Mountain bikes are damn expensive, So I think those things are all great, but providing opportunities for Indigenous people to also get to engage. Like my friend Alan, he goes up to Kayukit, which is a Nuchanuth. It's on the very northeast side of Vancouver Island, only accessible by boat, and he's an avid mountain biker. So he went in and built trails with the youth,
Yeah.
and now they've got mountain bike trails in their community. And so I think just providing opportunities for Indigenous people, because the fact is most of us are like very marginalized and don't have access.
I definitely feel like with Indigenous Life Sport and these operations, the seed is planted and it's gonna really blossom. I think of the Zero Ceiling Foundation, which was started over 20 years ago to bring underprivileged youth from the streets of Vancouver up into the mountains, take them skiing, take them snowboarding. And because it's such a long program, there's kids that have graduated out of that program, come back to become teachers in the same program, gone to other places. And, it does spread slowly. Is the problem without proper resources. It spreads slowly, but it definitely spreads. So
Yeah.
if we could, right now, those programs, I wonder how fast they could expand given the right resources.
Yeah. Because they're amazing. They're amazing programs.
The momentum seems to be there. We'll see what happens. I wanted to. Did you ever run in, with your name, using your Indigenous name in your business? I saw that there was a bit of pushback up against that. It feels like you're kind of making it up as you go with these solutions, and has there been a sort of sense of tradition that we would see in other in the church? You certainly can't go against tradition, right? But in the Indigenous world, has there been that sort of a little bit of pushback against some of the things you're doing, bringing in yoga perhaps, or whatever it is, or has everyone been pretty open?
I think there's always people who don't agree. Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of people who don't agree with what I'm doing with my work, but there's also a lot of people who do. So I know, like for me, the reason why I chose my name Nalaga to use my name Nalaga is because what it means. It means bringer of daylight or woman of light, and that's really what my business hopes to do, is spread light into the world and spread healing. So yeah, I think there's always going to be folks who don't agree, but yeah, I think the work is feel supported by the creator. And then bringing yoga in. Yeah, I have had some folks share about their disagreeing with, yeah, there's some people who completely disagree with yoga being done in a big house or, stuff like that. But yoga actually has a very similar history in terms of colonization and appropriation that indigenous cultures have. So it's a 5,000-year-old land-based spiritual practice that was stolen from northern India, brought to the West, and turned into Lululemon. And the people whose culture it belongs to, horrified of what they see that this spiritual practice has been turned into. But the language, Sanskrit, the language was born from the land in the same way from the people who belong to that culture sitting in quiet on the land. And that's how our language is. So there's a lot of parallels. And I found immense healing, because one of the things that trauma does is it disconnects us or makes us sort of just live in our minds and not our bodies. And yoga has been one of the ways that has helped me to safely reclaim empowered states of embodiment. So there's a lot of parallels with yoga, but yeah.
It's interesting. The good thing about yoga is it's free to do, right? As long as,
yeah.
Which anything free to do, you better keep an eye on that or people will do it.
Yeah.
I feel like, a little bit of a lighter, I want to talk to you about your roller derby days. Was that when did I just read about your roller derby days? I know nothing about it, but was that something you're into for a while, or?
Oh, I loved roller derby. It's my favorite pastime. I wish that my body wasn't so crippled and I could still do it. It's I started playing about 3 years into my recovery.
Right.
And in Vancouver, I played with the Terminal City Roller Girls, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It's like football and roller skates. It's a great avenue for getting aggression out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I miss it so much.
Do you have that sort of like high energy sport that you do that you replaced it with, or is it more just shredding with your kid? Or
yeah, we just go to the mountains, every other weekend, not too much. And my life now is focused mostly on like my kid, where I'm so busy with her gymnastics and all her activities. We do go roller skating on Friday nights.
Nice.
I just don't hit people anymore.
I wanted to, maybe as we start winding it down, I wanted to touch on the idea of resistance, on how, like you spoke about the community that was having the secret potlatches, and just how, resistance, it needs to be ongoing. There's no battle isn't won. And you say you're staying alive is just an act of resistance. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm a person who has lived with the spirit of suicide since I was 10 years old, which again is a very normal, living with the spirit of suicide is a normal human response to carrying those burdens of genocide, which is a very different way of looking at suicidality, contrary to what the mental health system says, which if you go to the doctor and you're suicidal, you're going to be given some antidepressants, which the first side effect is going to be you may want to kill yourself, so
Right.
watch out.
Wicked.
Like just an example of how broken our medical system is. So I've lived with that spirit. It attached itself to me when I was a little person, experiencing abuse as sexual abuse as a child, and that's when it attached itself to me, and it's just something that has come and gone from my life since then. And so when I think about those statistics of the leading cause of death of indigenous people between the ages of 11 and 44 being suicide, how many of those people experience that same trauma? And it's a normal human response. So when I think about resistance to what's been done to our people, staying alive and being like living a good life and feeling joy, and that is resistance. Being in our bodies is resistance. Being happy and experiencing joy is resistance. Because it's all the things that they didn't want. The goal was always about eradication. So when we stay here and we live good lives, I think that's what resistance feels
I feel like
to me.
through the work you do, it connects that resistance, it organizes it a little bit, and it lets people know, like, just you being alive, like this other person's alive, I'm alive. It builds that resistance into a more meaningful and impactful force for the future. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of it sounds like there's a lot of sort of darker components to what you do, talking to kids that are at suicide risk, or, talking to old people that have lived their lives not connected to this, thousands, tens thousands years old, right? And I don't think people realize when we say, oh, these indigenous people have been here for 10,000 years or 8,000 years or 16,000 years or however long we know, that's like 100 generations or more, right? Like, I don't think people really grasp how long that actually is. So, for someone that for hundreds of generations, and then in 3 or 2, you're no longer allowed to touch cedar bark. It's, it's kind of dark stuff, but there must be moments where, you get invigorated, lit up, you're sharing this light, but is there light coming back to you as well? Like, results?
Oh gosh, I wouldn't be alive today without my work. My work is my time to be in community. I probably get maybe more benefit from my workshops than the participants do, because that's my time to be vulnerable, be seen, be heard, and support others to be vulnerable and to share about for people to feel seen and heard is so important. And our world feels a bit isolated. And I just want to touch also on just when we're talking about staying alive as an active resistance, I just have to name right now the amount of people that are dying by drug poisoning. So like 35,000 people have died in BC over the last 5 years since fentanyl was introduced. 30,000 of those people are indigenous. It's like, if you use substances today, it's a death wish. You're going to die at some point. And so I just want to touch on that, because people are using substances because of trauma. They don't deserve to die because they haven't yet found another way to cope with trauma. So my work, yes, it brings joy, it brings connection, it brings healing, and it's what keeps me going. My daughter and my work are what keep me going on my path.
What do you think, or what would you say to, the people that are listening to this, indigenous or otherwise, right? I feel like probably it's mostly non-indigenous listening to the pod, but I don't really know because I don't look at the numbers. But what would you say to people to be like, listen, instead of doing a land acknowledgement and considering it reconciliation, what should people actually be doing, to work towards building a better future for all of us together?
I think one of the things that folks could do is show up to like land occupations, missing and murdered Indigenous women's marches, September 30th, Orange Shirt Day, showing up to those community events where we're bringing awareness to what's happening in our communities, because white bodies are valued more in our society. And I'm white passing, which has given me an incredible amount of privilege. So I'm indigenous and I've inherited those burdens of colonization, but I'm also white passing, which I'm treated differently in this world. And I use that privilege to create change for those who, like my mom, who is visibly indigenous, like her experience navigating all of these systems in the world are very different than mine. People get treated differently. So when we have white bodies show up to these events, I think that's probably the most important thing in my heart, to see the support of our community. Reading the TRC calls to action. Yeah. And I think land acknowledgements are great, but like, I had this one example of, a teacher takes a kid's water bottle and walks to the front of the class and said, I took your water bottle and I just want to acknowledge that I stole it. I'm not going to give it back, but I just want to acknowledge to you that I stole it.
Right.
And the kid was like, well, hey, that doesn't feel very good.
Yeah.
Thanks for acknowledging you stole my water bottle. But I want my water bottle back. So I think land acknowledgements are great, but like reconciliation would be giving right and title back to people, and stop making us fight in court over land. But I think that's what folks could do, is show up to those missing and murdered Indigenous women's marches, Orange Shirt Day, read the TRC calls to action, read the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Report, and just sort of get in the know and be an ally in that way.
We're coming towards the end of the week. What's your plans for the weekend?
What are we doing? We're going to the mountain on Saturday. Custa has a snowboard lesson and then a birthday party.
There we go. I'm glad you didn't say work.
Yeah, no work. I don't work on weekends. And roller skating on Friday.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Thank you, Avis. Like I said, I don't think these kinds of conversations are happening enough. Not here in the gnarly rad action sports outdoor recreation world, and not anywhere else either. So I'm super grateful Avis took the time out of her day to zoom in with us. And you should definitely hit up her Nalaga Consulting website at NALAGA consulting.com. There's also a trailer on there for Precious Leader Woman, the film she worked on with her sister, two-time Olympian and total badass Spencer O'Brien. Of course, I need, as always, to give thanks to Shirai Rules for the voiceovers off the top, to Adrian Gendro for the guitar licks, and huge thanks to you, mountain lifers, for your time, for your ear holes, and for letting us into your day. On the way out, I always like to remind everyone to check out the print editions of Mountain Life. That's Coast Mountains, Rockies, Georgian Bay, as well as Ville Montagne in La Belle Province. And if you can't find a physical copy that you actually hold in your hands, what a concept, I know, you can hit up mountainlifemedia.ca and check out the flip mags. Might as well hit the store while you're at it too. Get a t-shirt and help keep the heat on here at Mountain Life as we battle those Arctic chills. Beyond that, please stay safe out there. Be kind to each other, be kind to yourselves, and always leave the campsite better than you found it.